I was in Saskatchewan. I'd only been there twice before, and I thought Saskatchewan was the prairie view of Saskatchewan you see in all the calendars. Total flatness. Well, it's not. And when you get down into southwestern Saskatchewan, there's a place called East End, which is the east end of the Cypress Hills, which stretch into Alberta. And the Cypress Hills are where Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, led the Sioux Nation after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And he brought his people up into Canada in search of safety. Now, they had just wiped out Custer and his entire detachment. And they come up into Canada and they're feeling pretty cocky, and they're going to go talk to the Great White Mother, Queen Victoria. One man, an Northwest Mounted Police corporal called Walsh, received orders from Ottawa to turn them back. It would create too many diplomatic embarrassments if Sitting Bull were allowed to bring his people into Canada. And so this one guy, Corporal Walsh, with two constables, rode and met Sitting Bull and said, "You can't come in. I'm sorry, but the Great White Mother is in an insupportable situation." And so Sitting Bull turned around and he took his people back down into the United States. The countryside down in the east end of the Cypress Hills is amazing. It is so totally unlike prairie Saskatchewan that it's mind-boggling. And yet, you're driving across the Bald Prairie, suddenly you come to a dip and you drive down off the shelfland and you're in this magnificent valley. And there's a little town in there called East End, which is the eastern end of Saskatchewan. Well, I had a cousin there, and I went there, and there's not a lot to do. The nightlife is not too great. So what I did was borrow one of his half-tons and a single-shot 22 rifle, and I went looking for gophers. Not hard to find in Saskatchewan. But I drove for miles, and all of a sudden I found myself on a promontory, and there in front of me was what I discovered later was a teepee ring. A ring of stones that had been used to weigh down teepees. And it was completely surrounded by tools, broken stones with sharp edges that were crusted with the fat that the original people who lived there had used to scrape the tallow or the fat off the buffalo hides and cure them. That was an amazing experience. I found 3 arrowheads, and then I drove on, and we are miles from anywhere. So I drove down off the promontory and through these valleys and suddenly came to a place that was closed in, and there was an absolute mountain of bones there. And I thought it was a buffalo jump, except there was no height from which the buffalo could have jumped, so obviously it wasn't. I discovered much later that there had been a great blizzard in 1906 or 1896, I can't remember which. But something like 600 head of cattle had got blown by the wind, and they just drifted ahead of it, and they ended up in this box canyon and couldn't get out. And so they died there. 600 cattle. And the bones are still there to this day. When I came home again, I was living in Calgary at the time, I started thinking just about Saskatchewan in general and these things that I had seen. And about what most people think of as Saskatchewan, because it was Canadians who had told me, leaving from Alberta to go to Saskatchewan, what I would find there. Bugs, 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 and not a hell of a lot else, other than the occasional grain elevator. They were wrong, I'm very happy to say.